What a fucking awesome intro. Thanks a lot for that, Nick. That is awesome. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to our premiere episode podcast. This is our first recording of what we hope will be many. We're here to have an open conversation with two of my friends about some of the current topics of today. Today is Sunday, August 18th. 2024. Monday, tomorrow is the opening of the Democratic National Committee. As we record this podcast, there are Ukrainian troops occupying parts of Russia, an invasion not seen since World War II. So I invited two very special guests for this premiere episode, and I'm going to ask each one to introduce themselves. Then I'm going to dedicate this episode, and then we're going to get into it.
I'm Michael Maverick. I used to be the guitar player in the band Cannon Hill. I'm also the frontman of Michael Maverick and the Chaos Effect. We'll be playing a show August 31st at Bad Habits. If you guys are interested in coming and checking us out, unless anything I say on this podcast pisses you off, then, well, fuck you. And we also just released a single. It's called What I Want. It's everywhere, streaming everywhere. It's heavy. It's a banger. So if you like music, check it out, man.
Takoda Geyer, former drummer of Cannon Hill, full-time dad.
That's a good job description.
I want to take a moment and I want to dedicate this episode to the writer William S. Burroughs, author of Naked Lunch and a counterculture icon. I have been obsessed with the art of William S. Burroughs since I was a very young man and I was first introduced to him. His writings, more than anything, have helped to shape my view of this world, and I very much see us living in this landscape, this Burroughs-esque landscape. For those not familiar with Burroughs, he's part of what's called the Beat Generation, an amazing writer and generation that included Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg. But Burroughs, more than any one writer, spoke to me. His first book is called Junkie. His second book is called Queer. And he is a villain. He is a dark, dark figure. Shot his wife in the head in Mexico City. And it's not often that you get to be intimate with such a villainous mind. But he's considered the greatest satirist of his generation, but I just thought that helps give a little bit of context of how I view the world. If you guys don't know who Burroughs is, I really suggest spending some time with him because he's quite expansive. Let's roll the first two clips that we have queued up, Nick, and I'm going to give a little bit of a summary on the Democratic Party, my feelings towards the Democratic Party, and then I'm going to ask my two guests to do the same thing. So speak your mind, gentlemen.
We gotta show the reality, brother.
That's it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the second clip. This clip is from Juneteenth celebration at the White House. Unfortunately, the audio is a little bit off on this one. June of 2024. This man remains president of the United States despite the coup d'etat to get him off of the Democratic National Committee. The woman standing right beside him is now the presidential, soon-to-be presidential nominee, Kamala Harris. At this point, she's telling us Joe Biden is fine. The rest of the Democratic Party is telling us that there's nothing to worry about, where every American can clearly see the cognitive decline. And I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to tell you guys what kind of prompted this whole podcast for me to take the time to organize and want to have a discussion with some of my friends, want to have a discussion with some open voices. We open with the clip of the fentanyl crisis in America, right? This numbers, there's 100,000 Americans who are dead every single year since 2018 from the fentanyl crisis. That's the Biden-Harris administration. They've done nothing. All of the money anyway, Michael, I'm going to pitch to you.
Well, I've had close family relatives that were addicted to drugs. One of my family members, obviously I'm not going to say his name or anything like that, but he was addicted to heroin for years, and he's finally off of that, and he's doing well now, married, 2 kids, having the time of his life now. But the fentanyl crisis, the heroin crisis. I mean, you look at downtown Martinsburg, and it's a complete fucking disaster. I don't think it's one specific.
Every town, USA.
Yeah. And I don't think it's anything specific. Like I don't think that's any one person specific or any one particular person's fault. I think nobody's doing a fucking thing about it, and I think there's a reason they're not doing anything about it.
Money.
Yeah, it's all money, and I think that it has everything to do with saving a dollar, because to the government, to our elected officials, our presidents, all the way down to your local mayor and congressman, we are nothing but a dollar sign. We're nothing but a number, and they don't give a fuck about us. If we die, they don't care, and I think that's what's going on.
Even the dealers, you know, they mix the stuff with fent because it's cheaper. You know what I mean? They don't care if the person dies. They want their money. That's it.
Let's bring this back and give our take on the Democratic Party, because I think that we're going to hit this topic of fentanyl a few times. I've been deeply disturbed by the Biden administration for a few years now. One of the things that really was something that broke me was, the recognition of the whole Corona-19, right? All of a sudden, poof, magic, that's gone, right? Where there's no more vaccinations. You're not even allowed to talk about that today, right? You can get suppressed on certain platforms. I know Facebook makes a concerted effort. So I'm supposed to believe that we shut down the world for what they called a public health crisis, but yet this fentanyl and drug epidemic in the streets of Martinsburg, Kensington, New Jersey, Seattle, Washington, in every town USA, that's not a public health crisis, right? How come that's not the priority? We can dedicate the resources for Corona, but we didn't, and we're not going to dedicate the same resources to stop the fentanyl. And I'll put this out there as one of the things that helped break me with the Democratic Party was, I believe very much as if the corona was used to destroy the Trump presidency. So that is the one thing I look at that makes me want to turn around and give Trump even a reconsideration, right, to even think about Trump or to listen to Trump. It's because I can look back at this fiasco that was Corona, and they portray Trump as incompetent through that, and I believe that's what cost him his first term. So, Michael, what's your thoughts on the current state of the why would you vote Democrat if you were going to vote Democrat? Why would you vote for Harris?
Well,
if you're going to defend her, I
wouldn't. And I'm not a Republican. Anybody who knows me knows that. Right. I'm not a Republican nor a Democrat. I'm a libertarian, so I kind of I understand both sides of each party. My biggest problem is not my problem or anything, but like I don't like extremism, and that I think is the biggest problem that I'm currently having with the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, is that it's nothing but extremism. You have two sides of the spectrum that are on the extreme, very far end, and you know, a big problem for me is forcing your way of life, or forcing your opinions on other people, and that's what they're doing. And they're trying to force people, and anyone who disagrees with them is branded as either, you know, the far right will call them a terrorist and a communist, and then anybody who disagrees with the left is called a fascist or a bigot or a racist. And it's just, you know, we got to learn how to live and let live, and I think that these guys need to be held responsible for what's going on in the country and all these people that are dying from, like you said, the fentanyl crisis and everything. Like, these people need to be held responsible. I mean, my personal belief and I think a good solution would be that the people do what the people are supposed to do per the Constitution, and that is we show up and we arrest these politicians and we have them stand trial. If you're found innocent, you get to keep your seat in office. If you're found guilty, you're arrested for treason. I think that's kind of where we're at, and I think that's what George Washington would want us to do.
I'll pass to Takoda.
I agree with Michael. I mean, it's, you know, both sides. They both have their faults, and it's just, you know, if I want to vote for who I want to vote for, I shouldn't feel bad for who I want to vote for. You know,
right?
Like, if I want to vote Democrat, I shouldn't have to be called a terrorist or a traitor. If I want to be called Republican, I shouldn't be called a racist or, you know, anything like it's, you know, it's upsetting really, because you can't have your own opinion. You have to, you know, you have to be this way to this group and this way to that group, and it's not united anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely see a subscription to like dogma, and I look at the Democratic Party and my friends that are far left as existing inside of an echo chamber, right? And for me, some of the terrifying things that my friends have said are this whole advocating for political violence, right? And I'm thinking, do you guys not realize how insane you sound? Like, you sound like Osama bin Laden. You keep calling Trump and his supporters the MAGA extremists, the Nazis. You use all of these horrible terms, but it's you guys that are actually doing the work of the evil, right? To advocate shooting Trump, it's insane to me. And of course, we'll get into Trump in a moment. Michael, what's your thoughts on political violence inside of?
I disagree wholeheartedly with identity politics, and I don't think that you should wish harm or death on anybody just because you guys disagree. You know, I remember when Obama got elected, everybody was calling for, you know, the assassination of Obama and stuff, and I'm like, come on, man. You know, like, you don't have to like him, you don't have to agree with him, but wishing death on him or wishing harm on him, and the same thing with Trump. You got a lot of people that are wishing death on Trump and wishing harm on Trump, and I don't think that's fair. You know, this guy has a family, he has children, he has, you know, he's got people that care about him. And what if, with what you said, people were wishing harm and death on you, and you get shot in the face because somebody disagreed with you? What's your family going to do? They're going to grieve, and they're going to be heartbroken, and there's going to be nothing but hurt for everybody. Nobody wins in that scenario. You know, the person who killed you goes to prison, and your family suffers. Nobody wins.
And it only escalates, right? It becomes terrorism. It becomes one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. You know, so that worries me. And I had a friend, a good friend of mine, a left winger. His name is Tim McMullen. So here's my shout out to Tim. But I like to listen to Alex Jones every now and then, right? I'm not a huge fan of Alex Jones, but I'll listen to him, and I have listened to him for a long time. I'm not extremely familiar with the whole Sandy Hook debacle or whatever, but, you know, I want to listen to a wide variety of voices. I never limit myself to, you know, any echo chamber. So my friend advocated dragging Alex Jones behind a pickup truck, right? And I forget the guy's name, but I believe his last name was Bird. He was an African-American guy in Texas. He got drugged behind this pickup truck. It ripped his body apart by two like white supremacists. It was sometime in the 90s. But that was the first thing that came to my mind was, you know, advocating political violence just because you don't like another person's voice. But let's go ahead and cue up the Trump piece. And let's watch this. This is the Trump assassination. We had a difficult time finding any footage. We managed to get the whole thing from a Fox clip. So we're going to watch this, and then we're going to pick this up, and we'll talk about both parties, and we'll just see where this conversation goes. Then we're going to lean into World War III.
Oh, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
Let me get my shoes. I got you, sir.
Let me get my shoes, sir.
Hold that in your head. It's bloody.
So we got to move to the bus.
Let me get my shoes.
Okay, make sure you go.
Watch out.
Picture this. You're sitting.
So they couldn't kill him. Now they've shut him down. You can barely even find any images or any clips of this. And I said that this is the failure of the Harris-Biden administration. This lays at their feet, right? They're in charge of the fucking Secret Service. You can't keep your political opposition safe. I mean, I find that vulgar. Michael, share your thoughts on the assassination attempt.
Well, first of all, I do want to say that it was a bang-up job by the Secret Service, the way they reacted. They reacted pretty quick, man. I got to give them credit on that one. You know, and to me, it looks to me like things are getting to a point now where we are allowing our differences to dictate our actions instead of trying to see the other person's point of view. It's more like, oh, you believe differently than me, then you're the enemy. And that is a prime example of what we're seeing in that is somebody who's found someone who believes differently than them, and he wanted to kill them. I know there's a lot of stuff going around where people are saying it was fake, it was a hoax, whatever, but I don't know that. I think that would be a pretty difficult thing to fake, especially since the shooter is fucking dead. Like they painted that roof with that guy. So,
well, this is the first one the Simpsons got wrong.
Yeah,
Because
that's
remember
right.
the Simpsons
Yeah,
predicted Trump dead.
yeah.
Talk
Well,
about conspiracies. The Simpsons predict everything. I
We
think they
don't
got this one
vote
wrong.
until November. I don't believe this will be the only attempt on his life.
No.
And this thing is so laden with conspiracy theories, it's disgusting, right? So you start with the fact that Trump's lead team was pulled that day to go cover a Jill Biden event, and he basically has NSA protecting him. The girls are from NSA. They're not even Secret Service, right? So it's like one layer after another. And never in my life have I ever agreed with Marjorie Taylor Greene. But when she chastises and goes off on the FBI director in the congressional hearing, you know, you should commit suicide as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's a sad day in America, and it reeks of conspiracy, coordination, cooperation, and whether or not, you know, this guy, Thomas Crooks, was a Manchurian candidate. You know, it comes out he has foreign bank accounts, and I mean, just crazy stuff. That seems like an episode of The X-File. I'm happy that Trump survived this, but it definitely, again, it was another thing that made me go revisit Trump, right? And, I mean, I'll say this. For me, the greatest struggle I had with Trump was his failure with Charlottesville, right? I very much hoped that he would have rose to that occasion and had been able to speak better and handle the whole situation better. And that's only a month into his presidency. That's the whole, there's good people on both sides, right? And then, of course, when he goes through inauguration, you have people like Nick Fuentes, and you know, I think his name is Spencer, the one with the Nazi hair or whatever. So there is a lot of overt racism that comes out, you know, early in the Trump presidency that definitely bothered me tremendously. I don't see that now, and I do see a lot more African Americans moving towards Trump. I'm a big fan of the Hodge twins. I don't know if you guys know them, but they're big Trumpers. Michael, summarize your thoughts on Trump. First term, second term.
So that's so my thing is that, you know, when he was first running, his first campaign, I really liked him, you know, and then after he became president, you know, I believe that a lot of his economic policies were good, but then there was a lot of things that he did, and I'm like, all right, what the fuck are you doing, dude? And then as time goes on, as I get older, as I see things and I see how the world is working, I'm not a fan of the two-party system. You know, I'm just not. George Washington said before he died not to allow political parties into America, because then everybody would just be out to benefit their party and not the people. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. I think Donald Trump did a lot to try and benefit himself or the Republican Party before the American people, which, yeah, I mean, every politician does that, but it's a very tough question to answer, because there's so much, like, it's like we've been talking about, right? The identity politics where, you know, no matter what you say, you're wrong type thing. And it's like, no matter how you answer the question, you get crucified. And I don't know. I mean, it's a tough question to answer. I'm not a Trump supporter by any means, but I'm also not going to sit here and pretend like he's the next Hitler, I guess is the best way to summarize it.
Good way. Takoda?
You know, I kind of look at him like, I look at the good and the bad, you know? It's like anything with political stuff, you have to kind of figure out if they're faking or not. You know what I mean? So it's like, before he was running, he was friends with the people that hate him right now. So it's like he was friends with Oprah. He was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He was friends with a whole bunch of people.
Jesse Jackson even.
Yeah, he was friends with everyone that doesn't like him right now. So it's like, are you faking or are you serious? You know, it's just kind of one of those things you got to figure out for yourself. If he's not faking, then I think I'm probably more towards his side, I believe. But if he is, then it's the same story all over again.
I wanted to follow up with something you said, Michael, right? You were talking about there's not a lot of difference between the two parties. And one of the subjects that I want to talk about, I think, is going to lead into our next video clips. And I think we'll wrap up with these two video clips, and we're going to do a little bit more like a pre-discussion. But what I see is the uniparty, and that's one of my greatest, the one thing that made me. I've been a Democrat for 40 years. You mentioned Jesse Jackson. In 1984, when I was 18 years old, I cast my first vote for Reverend Jesse Jackson. I was always proud of that. I liked Reverend Jackson. I know he's a flawed man, but my heroes are flawed, and I can accept that, right? I'm a human. I make mistakes. I can understand other people can make mistakes. But I believed in this message back then. I've always believed in racial equity. That's always been a really important and motivating factor for me for staying politically active. I am going to vote in my 10th presidential election, 40 years, 10th. This is the first time in my life that I'm going to step into the voting booth, and I'm not sure which way I'm going, right? I'm going to make that decision that day. I formally went and changed my status, changed from being a Democrat to, I say it jokingly, non-denominational, right? Because I cannot support and endorse the continued policies of the Biden and Harris administration. But I look at the uniparty, right? The war in between Ukraine and Russia, that is funded by the uniparty. Without Speaker of the House Johnson, they wouldn't have got the last aid package through. Zelensky went to Trump and talked to Trump, and then he went and talked to Speaker Johnson, and here we are almost through the third full year of the conflict between NATO and Russia. That brings up our final two clips. The first one is a clip of Andre Bustamante, who has an amazing podcast called Everyday Spy. And the second clip is from one of my favorite channels. You would love it too. Task and Purpose. Chris Cappy, he's a soldier, has an amazing channel. But let's look at those two clips, and then we're going to get into a discussion about whether we are or are not in World War III.
If World War III would have happened, what would it look like? Would it look like World War II?
So it's funny, people ask me this question relatively frequently, and it's always surprising to me that people assume World War III hasn't already started. I would actually make the argument World War III has already started. We're in the middle of World War III right now. It's just that World War III looks nothing like World War II. World War II was about the Axis powers and the Allied powers fighting against each other in these giant unified military conglomerates, right? So it was the UK and the Australians and the Americans and the French all fighting against to push, Russia out of, to push the Nazis out of Poland. It was a threat of nuclear weapons. It was drills. It was bombing raids. That was World War II. Well, think about what World War I looked like compared to World War II. World War I looked completely different. It was trenches and gas warfare and hot air balloons instead of bombing raids. Well, World War I and World War II were less than 50 years apart. So why do we think that World War III and World War II would look anything like each other? It's already been more than 50 years since that war ended, right? So when you look into what's actually happening around the world in terms of military doctrine, strategic development, technological evolution since World War II, all the evidence points to the fact that World War III would be a war of what's called proxy conflict or proxy wars. Proxy conflict, proxy wars, means that wealthy benefactors essentially subsidize or pay smaller developing or third world countries to fight against each other. And then in that infighting, they can drive influence, they can infiltrate with some of their own espionage agents or spies. They can create havoc all over the world and always have plausible deniability, because they're not the ones with boots on the ground. So when you think about what proxy war is, and then you think about what happened towards the end of the global war on terror. So think about it. The United States invades Iraq. The United States invades Afghanistan. That was basically the end of your traditional World War II style of invasion. When you start looking at what happened in Syria, what happened in Libya, what happened in Yemen, and you start looking at how conflict has progressed since the end of the global war on terror, you start to see that what you have is these proxy conflicts. Iran funds Hezbollah in Lebanon to fight Israel. The United States funds Ukraine to fight Russia. China funds, you name it, in Southeast Asia to fight any powers that be, from the Australians to the Americans to whatever else. So you have all these proxy conflicts happening now, essentially between.
I think that's a good clip. Let's take a look let's go 4 minutes on this is Task and Purpose.
Members of Congress are calling the influx of Chinese fentanyl an act of asymmetric war against the United States. The Drug Enforcement Agency estimates 90% of fentanyl comes from Chinese companies that not only operate legally inside of China, but are also subsidized and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. China sends precursor chemicals, which are then processed and manufactured into synthetic opioids by Mexican drug cartels that then smuggle them into the United States.
Fentanyl precursor chemicals are made in China.
It is not at all an area of dispute that China provides the fentanyl that comes into the United States. Yeah.
On the other hand, China claims the fentanyl crisis is entirely an American domestic issue that's being blamed on them. China claims Big Pharma's opioid corruption, weak U.S. laws, and a culture of American drug glorification are really to blame. This disagreement is a
immerses you in a universe with
a major problem for the world's two biggest economies. Attempts to stop this have failed, leading to calls for U.S. military intervention against Mexican cartels to stop the substance's devastating effects.
Growing calls from Republicans to send the U.S. military into Mexico to combat drug cartels.
For example, in 2022, over 107,000 Americans died from overdoses in the United States, and fentanyl poisoning became the leading cause of death of Americans 18 to 45 years of age. A 2019 paper found that prescription opioids accounted for 44% of the decline in labor force participation among men. In asymmetric warfare, one nation seeks to exploit the other's relative weakness. In this case, China's accused of exploiting America's appetite for illicit drugs and weaponizing fentanyl. When US President Donald Trump and China's President Xi Jinping engaged in an all-out trade war in 2018, the Chinese government then increased tax breaks and subsidized companies that were exporting fentanyl abroad to punish the United States. When Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in 2022, against China's wishes, they stopped all cooperation between Chinese and US law enforcement agencies that were working to fight fentanyl trafficking. It's clear the fentanyl crisis has become deeply ingrained in foreign diplomacy today. But the idea of weaponizing substances against an adversary is nothing new. Because if there was ever a country to understand the power of addiction in geopolitics, it's China. Qin Gang, China's former ambassador to the United States, said, quote, "The Opium War started a century of humiliation for China. Some Americans believe that China is the primary source of fentanyl in the United States. Some even fantasize that China's shipping fentanyl to the United States as a form of payback for the Opium Wars, and that North America has been flooded with precursor chemicals from China, stifling international efforts. The theory is that China is using the same tactic that was used against them, but now they're turning it against the West. Over 170 years ago, in the mid-19th century, the Opium Wars led to what China calls their Century of Humiliation, that they claim only ended in 1949, except in the Opium Wars the roles were reversed. At the time, the United States, Great Britain, and France found themselves going crazy over Chinese tea and silk. But Britain ran into a problem. They started running low on silver necessary to pay for these exotic goods. The British turned to their Indian colony and said, hey, how about you guys produce opium, a highly addictive drug, and then we can trade it to China for all these sweet, sweet tea leaves and silk. Selling opium probably wasn't initially designed to create an epidemic in China, but instead it was probably a method to restore the balance of trade back in Europe's favor. It's like a history lesson on how not to win friends and influence people. Opium smuggled by the British and American traders skyrocketed in the mid-1800s. Massive amounts of Chinese silver was flowing out of their country to the West to pay for opium. At its peak, 13.5 million Chinese out of 400 people in their population were hooked.
So a few months ago, I went looking for, connections to try to understand this whole fentanyl thing a little bit better. Just so we're clear on the numbers, Chris Cappy mentions 2018. So since 2018, more than 100,000 Americans die every single year from fentanyl overdose. On top of that, you have another 20,000 Americans who die every year from homicide. From 2018 to now, we've gone through the whole coronavirus thing, right? Why isn't this the number one public health issue that we're talking about, right? Anything to designed to weaken your opponent. So in the 4 years of the Biden administration, that means 500,000 Americans. Same number of people that are reported to have died in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, right? 500,000 on both sides. So we've lost 500,000 Americans. They are bleeding our country. And let me be real fucking clear here. This country is in no fucking shape to go fight World War III. We're in no fucking shape. And we are nose to nose with China. We talk shit. We're nose to nose. We're invaded Russia. So, Michael, your thoughts?
I would definitely agree with you that I don't think we're in the shape to fight World War III. And I think the reason, there's a big reason for that. And I think that it has very little to do with military power. I think it has to do with the fact that, and this is a bit of a hot take, but we're on a conspiracy theory podcast, so fuck it. Honestly, I think it's because men aren't allowed to be men anymore.
Agreed.
I really do.
Elaborate.
Well, think about it this way, okay? You have, all these men out here. Well, I say men loosely. You have all these grown adult males out here walking around with fucking man buns and a strawberry cheesecake vape. Fucking, I love watching my wife get plowed by another guy in front of me. And it's like, and if you say anything like, hey, I'd prefer it if my woman didn't, flirt with other guys or mess around with other guys, all of a sudden now you're attacking their way of life. And you also, they're pushing this whole narrative of toxic masculinity. I don't see what's so toxic about me loving mixed martial arts and teaching a boy how to chop wood to be a man and Joe Rogan and just these things that men do. These things that men do. I don't see what's toxic about that. Hunting is now toxic masculinity, and it's like the way I always say it is teach your boys how to be men before society teaches them how to be pussies. And that's essentially what's happening right now. Is society is turning men into a bunch of little bitches who run around and they're offended by everything you say, and they're constantly fighting for shit that's not there. Everybody has to be a fucking activist. Everybody has to be they have to fight for something, even when there's nothing to fight for. And realistically, that is going to take its toll, especially if we're talking in a war, because, it takes a man to do man things.
Balls.
Yeah, you got to have a set of fucking cojones on you to do that kind of shit. And if you don't have it, what do you got? Nothing. You're going to get steamrolled. And you got these fucking douchebags that work at Starbucks that are they're crying because they have to work an 8-hour shift. Meanwhile, you got these people in other countries who are fucking fighting their ass off to make sure they can eat today. So I think that what's happening is that society is taking the man aspect of being a man away, and that's a scary, scary fucking thing. And you got cucks and these guys that are just throwing money at women for OnlyFans and shit like that. It's a huge problem.
But if you say anything about it, you're the bad guy.
I love being the bad guy, so I'm gonna say it. I think they're contaminating the fucking gene pool. I really do.
Just like when they went after that Chiefs kicker.
Yeah.
For having Catholic values.
Yeah. Yeah. God forbid you have your own opinion on religion and shit. But yeah, what I think is happening is very fucked up, and I think it's contaminating the gene pool, and I think it's breeding a generation of weak men.
if we are clearly in an open, let's not fucking hide this, right? We're in an open war with Russia, right? All we're doing is we're fighting with proxies, right? We've got Ukraine, and we're killing Ukrainians at a record number. We're killing Palestinians. We're killing fucking Israelis. We're killing Yemenis, and to expect them not to retaliate, to expect them not to be doing things to this country that are disruptive to it, especially during its political season, I think it's naive not to believe that there are foreign entities interfering with American politics. But also I believe that there's, the oath that you take says enemies foreign and domestic, right? So I always worried about that, enemies domestically. Who am I? Who are you to say this is my enemy? But there are enemies of America inside of us. There's corporations, and those interests don't serve your interest. So I want to follow up, because you're talking about masculinity. So I'm going to probably bring in one of the most controversial topics out there today, which is this whole transgenderism thing, right? And I do very much see it as some form of asymmetrical warfare. I don't see the benefit from allowing children to undergo hormone replacement. I see it as Dr. Frankenstein, as an artificial construct, right? Whatever people do after a certain age, right? You can't get a tattoo until you're 18. But if at 18 you want it trans or whatever it's called, fine, I don't care, But to do it to a child, I think it's Frankenstein.
That's a difficult topic, and it's very easy to get lost in that topic. For me, I don't know much about it, and I don't know enough about it to form any sort of opinion or any sort of anything. My thing is that I don't have a medical degree. I'm not a biologist. I'm not anything like that. So I don't want to say anything for certain, just because I'm not going to be coming from an educated place, and I'm just going to make myself sound like an ass.
And I'm cool with that. I understand that. But I also want to follow up here, because this is a conspiracy-oriented discussion, right? So you give this admiration, you put this medical establishment, you put the medical establishment on your last statement. You put them on a pedestal. Okay. And I want to be clear, they do not deserve that pedestal at all. The medical community was complicit in the early days of the opiate epidemic. Anyone that followed this, in the beginning, you went and saw doctors, right? Rush Limbaugh, the conservative radio show host, had become horribly addicted to the pain pills after copular implants. But for me, I spent most of my life working in psychiatric units. I had nothing but the deepest admiration for medical doctors. I put them on that same pedestal, but from the opiate addiction on, they're just fucking a pusher. They're the pushers. They work for pharmacological corporations. It's coming out. They don't even know what the fuck Paxil and Prozac do, right? They've been prescribing this fucking bullshit for like 30 fucking years, and they have no real clue. When I worked in psychiatry, I told everyone it was a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and we would throw these bullshit videos in there that would give this pseudoscience, and people believed it. So now all the research, I have a hard time putting the same respect that you do into the medical establishment. Since then, and especially with Corona, it's less than trusting of the medical establishment. Also, one of the things that bothers me with the medical thing and with the Democratic Party, right, is for the longest time, we were talking about free universal health care, right? That was something, and that seemed aspirational. But that conversation is long gone, you know. We look at this opiate addiction and this fentanyl crisis, and the money to deal with it is all gone because we've given it to Ukraine and to Israel. That's just truth. We have a national deficit of $35 trillion. We just hit, what is it? How often does $1 trillion get added? It's like once every 90 days or something like that now. So for me, I look at, well, one, how can you ask me to support you for your reelection? Right? So I give you that summary. Ronald Reagan, when I was a much younger man, asked, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Fuck no, man. I'm barely fucking making ends meet. You know, I'm barely surviving. And there's
1 trillion every 100 days.
There you go. That's what we add to the national deficit. So let's do some closing thoughts. Anything you guys want to follow up on? Any questions? You know, are we in World War III, and what do you see as asymmetrical warfare?
I don't think we're in World War III yet, but I think we're fucking close. I mean, you know, the nuclear clock. There's a nuclear clock that's like shows how
for
close.
you, would that be a hot war if it's American boots on the ground against Russian boots on the ground? Is it a hot war that you're looking for?
No, I think it's all going to be fought. Well, not all, but I think a lot of it's going to be fought digitally, and I think a lot of it is going to be done like through the power grids and shit like that. But I definitely think there will be boots on the ground at some point. I definitely think a lot of people are going to die. I mean, you're talking about 3 world superpowers that all fucking hate each other. So,
see, I wonder about Ukraine is doing operations inside of Russia, right? There was the Crocus music hall shooting, right? Where just some guys with AK-47 shoot up like a real popular music venue. I do honestly believe that we could face things like what we would call terrorist activity, sabotage, things along that line, before we have a full-blown exchange. And I believe that we're already in World War III, and I'm always looking for signs of what I consider to be asymmetrical warfare. Takoda?
If we are in World War III, I don't think they would tell us, because they don't tell us anything, you know? So they don't want us to panic. They don't want us to, you know, run around like chickens with their head cut off or anything. They want to keep us cool and calm. But if we are, I can definitely see it. You know, I'm a Christian, so I believe in like Revelation and all that stuff. So I think that after this, I think it might be close anyway to like the end of the world. You know, I'm that end of the world guy. You know what I mean?
I'm clearly that end of the world guy.
Yeah.
You know.
So yeah, I think after World War III, like when it's over, they're gonna try to take our weapons away. Try to unite everyone, you know, try to say no more world war, and then that's when everything's gonna, you know, what Revelation says. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So.
I'm just gonna say that if we do have World War III and nukes are what ends the world, I win a bet. So if we could just speed this process up, bring me my money.
My closing question is going to be to both of you. What do you think the future holds? And let's focus on the next 5 years. What happens in America?
The next 5 years, I think freedom of speech becomes a luxury that only certain people can have. And I think that the U.S. government is going to try and take firearms away from the population, which is going to create bloodshed the likes of which has never been seen before on this earth. And I think that I think we have 2 options. There's going to be a huge breakthrough in America where America becomes what it once was, which is the world dominant superpower for a fucking reason. And we kick ass, we take names, and that's what we do. Or I think we're going to fall flat on our faces, and we're going to be speaking Russian or Chinese. I think that's kind of what we're looking at here soon.
I think the stock market crashes in the next 5 years. And I think we go back into a Great Depression. I think Trump does everything he can to help, but I think it's out of his power.
It's that's not a bad take at all.
No, I like you guys, both of your summaries. I definitely would say that the next 5 years are going to be incredibly unpredictable, right? And they're unwritten, and we're definitely in uncharted times. I do find myself wondering who makes the decisions inside the Biden administration. I don't believe it's President Biden or Kamala Harris.
No.
My big focus has always been on National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. I believe that he's the real voice, and backed up by Lloyd Austin and Secretary Blinken. But I believe that no matter who gets this election, who wins, either her or him, I don't believe that there's going to be any real changes inside the foreign policy. I also believe that we remain in an escalatory posture with both Russia and in the Middle East. I mean, clearly there's threats from Iran against Israel, and so we'll see where the next few months go. Thanks, you guys, for being part of this. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to record episode 2, which is titled UAP Alien Disclosure 2017 The Present, and that one is going to be a lot less structured, and we're going to have just a fun conversation about the whole alien disclosure movement. So please check it out. Bye.